I was to ask a group of people what they see when they look at this object I'm holding in my hand, the great majority, if not everybody, would say, well, I see an acorn. And I say, well, that's one possibility, but actually when I look at this acorn, I see an oak forest. Because I understand that if I were to plant this acorn and nurture it and water it and give it proper conditions, it would grow into an oak tree, which over time would produce thousands of acorns that would fall to the ground and germinate, and eventually over time they would develop into an oak forest. And then I look and I imagine the ecosystem that oak forest would create, the habitat it would create for wildlife of all different sorts, and the effects, beneficial effects it would have on the environment. It would take carbon dioxide out of the air and replenish the air with oxygen. It would create shade. It would have all these tremendous benefits. And then we could go in and we could start harvesting the oak, and we could build beautiful dining room tables to have Thanksgiving dinners around. We could build beautiful clinics to serve our patients in. We could build cribs to keep our children safe while they're sleeping. We could build coffins that we could send our loved ones to the other side in as we celebrate their life. So, and then we could build a box of matches, and we could destroy in hours what it took innate intelligence centuries to build. So when I look at this acorn, I see in fact infinite potential. And when I look at this acorn, which is just an acorn from another geography, just because it's maybe 3 or 4 times bigger than this acorn doesn't mean it has any more or less potential. Infinite potential is infinite potential. And so if we bring it into our context, it doesn't matter how big we are, or how small we are, how thin we are, how fat we are, how old we are, how young we are, what happened yesterday, what happened last week, last month, last year. Within each and every one of us is infinite potential, which we call innate intelligence. It expresses itself over our nervous system, and if we live fully connected to this intelligence, all possibility is within our reach. Anything is possible within our life experience. Healing on any level is possible if we can release this intelligence and keep it flowing without interference. Okay, so the takeaway from that, and for me, the number one thing, and maybe the only thing a person needs to believe in order to become a patient in this clinic, is that they have this infinite potential within them. So are you both good with that? You believe you've got this innate intelligence inside you? And once we grasp onto that and we understand we've got this unlimited healing potential, it's easy to then appreciate that in fact our bodies are self-healing and self-regulating. They don't need any help, they just need no interference, right? And it's easy to prove that the body's self-healing. If I cut my hand here, we all accept the cut would bleed, right? And then the blood would form a clot. Everyone agree with that? And then the clot would form a scab. And if we put a camera underneath the scab and watched on a microscopic level, we'd observe that that cut would heal from the deepest part of the wound to the surface. The skin would grow over, the scab would fall off, and healing would be complete. So it shows the body heals itself, and it heals from the inside to the outside, right? Make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, at the same time, if I went into a morgue and I took a person who had died a minute ago, and I took their left hand and I produced an identical cut on that hand, would that cut bleed?
No. Yes.
Virginia's right. It would bleed.
Uh-huh.
Would the blood clot? It would, right? But would the cut heal? It would not. You're right. So the question becomes, what do I have within me that that dead person no longer has?
Life force energy.
Yeah, you got it. So it's life that heals. So the body does not heal itself. Life force energy, life heals. And that's the number one premise in chiropractic. This intelligence, this life force, is what heals us, and it needs a medium through which to express itself. So the second premise is that life expresses itself over our nervous system, and the nervous system's the master control system of our body. So each of your 70 trillion cells is controlled by your nervous system, and more specifically by the life flowing over your nervous system. So all the chemistry in the cells of your body controlled by life flowing over the nervous system. All the functions of the cells in your body controlled by the life force flowing over the nervous system. Every hormone system controlled and regulated by the life flowing over the nervous system. When we're called upon to heal, regulated by the life flowing over the nervous system, and it flows from the brain down, from the inside to the outside, okay? So the nervous system is the master control system of our body, and we can actually demonstrate that quite simply. You know, let's say, for example, if I took and I went and I cut the nerves to this person's heart and lungs, what would happen if those heart and lungs had no nerve supply? They'd die, right? But what would happen if I didn't cut them, but I just put pressure on them and reduced the flow of life by 50%? How much of their capacity, their potential, would they be able to express?
Maybe not even 50%.
Maybe not, right? But certainly no more than 50%, right? So we can understand then that if the nervous system's functioning without interference, we can express our optimum innate potential on every level. Our optimum healing potential, our optimum creative potential, our optimum athletic potential, our optimum academic potential, in fact, our optimum human potential, right? But if there's interference within the system, that gets dimmed down. So all of our potential starts to get shut down or dimmed down. And that can have physical consequences, right? Like we just demonstrated, if we severed the nerves to the heart and lungs, that's a physical consequence. But because our nervous system also perceives our world and allows us to adapt and respond to it, it can have psycho-emotional consequences as well. So the third premise is that interference in the system, or interference to the expression of life, can have physical and psycho-emotional consequences, okay? So for instance, if we look at this model here, if I can do it without spilling anything. This is just a model of the top two bones in the neck, and there's a specialized structure up here called the brainstem, or the medulla, and it's an extension of the spinal cord, and it's basically where the brain meets the spinal cord. Very complex neurology. All the reflex centers in the nervous system are centered here, and it's very susceptible to pressure. And so what we know is that we all have an infinite innate potential within us, but what can be variable is how much we're expressing. So if the top bone in the neck shifts out of alignment just a millimeter or two, we can see it starts to dim down the expression of this potential. And the experience that person will have will depend upon their wiring, how their nervous system is wired. So we call this a subluxation in chiropractic. The main switch is up here. That's our main focus in this office. And then we look at the rest of the spine underneath it. So if this area is out of alignment, all the cells in the body below that will suffer from a lack of life force. The brain above it will suffer from congestion. There'll be a back pressure, if you will, of mental impulse that can cause issues up above. And the only way we can correct that is by correcting the alignment and restoring the flow, okay? So if we have one person living in this state with nerve interference, what do we have? A sick person,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But if we have a community of people living that way, what do we have?
A sick community.
A sick community, right, or a sick country.
Sick country,
and,
yeah.
and so do we have a healthy or a sick country in Canada?
We have a sick country.
We do, without a doubt. All the statistics tell us that our country is sick and it's getting sicker, right? We're number one in the world in something in Canada, believe it or not. We're number one in the amount of opioid pain medication that we take, right? Which is highly addictive, causes all sorts of problems, drives chronic pain, not a good thing, right? we're also number 2 in the world in the amount of money we spend on prescription drugs per person. Number 1 country is the United States, and we're number 33 in the World Health Organization's ranking of healthiest countries. The United States number 47 or something like that. So we take more drugs than any countries in the world, but we're among the sickest nations in the world. And so we have this sick society. Do we have a healthcare system in Canada or a disease care system?
Disease.
We have a disease care system and a crisis care system. Sometimes it's necessary. I broke my wrist a couple years ago, needed the disease care system, right? They did a great job. A friend of mine's future son-in-law had his appendix burst yesterday, needed the disease care system, and they saved his life, right? So we get that it's necessary sometimes, but what chiropractors do that no other health profession does is we check people for nerve interference. So our job, our responsibility, the thing that makes us different, and the only thing we do in this clinic is check people for subluxations, for nerve interference, okay? Subluxation's a big, long word. I don't actually use it too much in the clinic because it's complicated. I just call it nerve interference. But if I use it, just understand a subluxation is a misalignment between the bones and the spine that decreases the flow of life into your body. And so our job is to find that problem and remove it and keep that person free of interference so their body can resurrect itself, rebuild itself, restore itself from the inside out over time. And then we want to keep that person connected to their intelligence for the rest of their life. Make sense?
Right.
So the fourth premise then is that chiropractors check people for nerve interference. And we want to do it from the time of birth to death in an ideal scenario, right? I mean, everybody takes care of their teeth, right? Did you both brush your teeth today?
Mm-hmm.
How come?
I don't know, because I guess society accepts us to do so.
Right, but
we want to take care of ourselves.
yeah, and we want our teeth to last a lifetime,
Right,
a
yes.
lifetime, right? It is ideally why we do it. And our dentists have done a good job of teaching us about oral hygiene, right? So sometimes people hear, well, once you start seeing a chiropractor, you have to go for the rest of your life. You don't have to. Most people choose to because they like what it does to their life. They like how their life experience changes while they're under chiropractic care. And there's nothing in our society that we don't maintain, right? People are freaking out right now because we've got a drought situation and their lawns are turning brown, which is just the innate intelligence in the grass saying, I'm going dormant because there's not enough water around. So it's not dying, it's just going dormant. And if we get a day of rain, everything will green up again, right? So to put that all into perspective, this just summarizes the fifth principle that we're talking about, which is the principle of time. So what we said tonight is we've all got this life potential. It's infinite. If it's flowing at 100% with no interference, we're living in a state of ease, which is a term the founder of chiropractic used to describe a state of harmony and balance within our bodies, okay? And the minute we develop nerve interference or have a subluxation, we start to live in a state of dis-ease, a state of unbalance or a state of disharmony. And our body and our life experience starts to deteriorate. Our function starts to drop off. Our chemistry starts to shift away from normal. And it's just a downward spiral. We might not be aware of it right away, right? It might take years of living this way, decades, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, until we hit a critical point, a threshold, I call it, right? Just like when water reaches 212 degrees, it boils, right? Nothing happens before then, but once it reaches that critical point, it boils, right? A carbon monoxide detector does nothing until a certain critical number of carbon monoxide particles build up in its sensors. When thresholds met, the alarm goes off. So if we had a carbon monoxide detector in here and it went off, and I just ripped it from the wall and sparks flew as the wires became disconnected, the alarm would shut off. But would we be at more risk or less risk?
More.
more risk, right? And if I said, listen, I only got 5 more minutes of my talk to go, so just hold tight, would you?
No.
You'd run, right? But what's our disease care system do? It puts things into our body or rips things out of our body to cover up the alarm, the symptoms, the conditions, and the diseases which are a result of living in this state, but it doesn't correct the underlying cause. So only chiropractors correct the underlying cause. Now the thing is, if people get to this state of crisis, it's taken them 10, 20, 30, 40 years to get there. It takes time to get there. Do you think it's going to take time to get them out of there? And it absolutely will. And we never know how much time. We can take a reasonable stab at it, if you will. We don't know how many adjustments the person's going to require because we're all different. So our thing is, let's start taking care of you, removing the interference as we have to, and then once you get up above threshold, your symptoms go away. But let's keep going and work with you so you can express as much of this inborn potential as possible in your life. Not just in your physical well-being, but in all areas of your life. Does that make sense? So that's what we're all about here. And at first, we're going to remove the subluxation after the first adjustment. Then we have to maintain that correction until your body can restore itself. It's going to slip back. And so correcting a subluxation is like building a house. You start with the foundation, right? And you want the foundation blocks to be nice and close together. So we got to see people frequently at first. And then as things start to improve and they start to stabilize and they can tolerate more stress, we can start to space their adjustments out over time. And everybody's a unique individual, so we're going to follow their response to care. So we're going to put a game plan forward for you, a plan of care, and then we'll monitor your response, okay? And so that's how we do it in the clinic here. And all we do in this clinic is check people for interference and we remove it, okay? And we trust the wisdom of their body to do the rest. I want to just share one case to tie this all together for you. So this is my friend Michael, and I have the family's permission to use his case. In fact, his case is published in a book on chiropractic for children. So Michael got stuck in the birth canal when he was being born, and to get him out, they had to put vacuum extraction on him. So they put a suction device on his head and they pull him out under suction. It slipped off, so they put it back on and they turned the suction up and they pulled harder. And when Michael was born, he was the victim of birth trauma, and it had dire consequences in his case. Birth trauma is, first of all, common, it's often severe, and it's usually overlooked, right? In this particular case, they couldn't overlook it. His APGAR score, which is supposed to be 10, was 3. He was very, very blue, and he was breathing very, very rapidly. And they very quickly determined that the muscle that controls breathing wasn't working on his right side. His diaphragm was way up here on the right, and they had pulled the nerve that controls the diaphragm right off of the spinal cord, right? And so they put him on this device, which is a neonatal CPAP unit, to try and drive oxygen into his system. And it helped a little bit, but he had this really rapid breathing rate, was having difficulty oxygenating. They found out his right arm was affected as well. They had damaged those nerves. And then when mom went to feed him, everything would just come back up, because the diaphragm forms a valve over the stomach in a newborn baby and keeps the breast milk in, or the feed in. So he couldn't keep anything down, and so within a day of birth he was given a nasogastric feeding tube through his nose down into his stomach. They could put only a tiny amount of fluid in, of formula or breast milk in, and he'd throw most of it out. And he had this horrible retching going on, so they gave him drugs for reflux disease. And how can drugs for reflux disease help when the cause is a paralyzed diaphragm? It just doesn't even make sense to me, right? I have to point that out. But Michael lived like this for 6 weeks at Sick Children's Hospital. And they came to mom at about 6 weeks, and mom and dad, and said, we want to do a surgery on Michael, and we're going to take his diaphragm and we're going to pull it down to where it belongs and sew it in place. And mom said, well, what will that do? And they basically said, we're not sure. and Mom said, but if you do that, it'll never heal. And they looked at Mom and they said, it's not healing. Like, this is his life. And it's going to get worse, because as he grows, that diaphragm muscle on the left is going to twist him up and really distort his posture, and he's going to have problems. And Mom's like, I'm not comfortable doing the surgery. Said, okay, we're going to send you home. We'll send a nurse in every couple of days to check the feeding tube. And they gave them great medical care at Sick Children's Hospital, right? Michael's father works with a patient of ours. And when the patient heard the story, he said this, you know what? Your child's capacity to heal is far greater than you've been led to believe. Guess where he learned that? Right? Right here. Right? Secondly, he said, many children are born with this thing called a subluxation. It's quite common, and it could be causing some or all of Michael's problems. And third thing he said is, my chiropractor, Dr. Peters, sees a ton of children. Maybe you should take him to see him. And they did. They brought him in, and it was a Friday morning, November 21st or 23rd, I want to say.
Let me think about that.
Okay, I don't know either.
What I found on the web for a third thing you said is my God.
So, I don't know how that happened.
Is that Michael?
Yeah, that's interference.
Oh, yeah.
So at any rate, they brought him in 4 years ago last November, and I remember it was a busy Friday morning, late November, and all I could hear was this retching sound out in the reception area. And they brought Michael in. I walked in the room, his feeding tube's hanging down his side. He's still having trouble breathing, a really rapid heart rate. I put my hand on this side, I feel the diaphragm going up and down. Put my hand here, nothing's going on, right? I check him, and I estimate in my career I've checked over 15,000 people, children and adults. And I teach pediatric adjusting around the world. And I can tell you without a doubt, Michael's atlas, the top bone in his neck, was the most massive subluxation I've ever appreciated in my lifetime. And so we told Mom that we want to get started right away, gave her a brief explanation of what we do. She gave permission, we adjusted Michael, we sent him home, said come back for this workshop on Monday night. So they came in Monday night, right around 7 o'clock, and I said to Mom, how'd the weekend go? One adjustment, he stopped throwing up and retching. We took him off the drugs for reflux disease. I said, awesome. They heard what you heard tonight. They decided to continue with care 3 times a week. 2 weeks after he started care, the feeding tube came out. He was taking full feeds, no throwing up. We kept adjusting him. A month after starting chiropractic care, he went for a follow-up ultrasound, which revealed perfect movement of the diaphragm on the right side and perfect balance with the diaphragm on the left side. He was back in a state of ease again. So we kept adjusting. He got checked 3 times a week for a number of months because the damage was so severe, right? And our job, he wasn't holding, so our job is just to keep clearing it out until he can hold. And so we kept adjusting him. He started to grow because he was grossly underweight. He started to move his arm around. A couple months into care, they were down at the brachial plexus clinic at Sick Children's Hospital. And Mom was explaining that he seemed to be moving his arm quite freely, and the specialist said, you know what? Mothers see what they want to see. I'm the expert. And almost if on cue, Michael raised his arm above his head, and the fellow said, I guess I look like a bit of a jerk right now, right? And gave him a clean bill of health. So we continued to adjust Michael, and this is what he looked like 3 months into care, and this is what he looks like a year after starting chiropractic care. And he brought me a picture in this past winter, and this is Michael now. He's 4.5 years old, and he's a hockey player, right? Which is awesome. And we celebrate the miracle that was in Michael waiting to be expressed when the interference was being removed. But I think about Michael a lot, and a couple things I think about are this. A, he was in the best, arguably the best children's hospital in the world, or one of the best. How come they couldn't find the subluxation up here?
They don't look for it.
They don't look for it because they're not trained to look for it, right? That's chiropractic. It would be like asking me to find a hole in a child's heart. Not my training, couldn't do it. Right? So only chiropractors are trained to detect and correct subluxations. The second thing I think about is how much money did it cost our healthcare system to take care of Michael for those 6 weeks in Sick Children's Hospital? And how different would it have looked if he'd have been adjusted right at birth? So the sooner we can check people, the better, right? Make sense? Most importantly, what I think about is, what did Michael's family go through and Michael go through that could have been avoided or minimized if he'd have been adjusted right after birth? And the biggest thing I think about is Michael got to a chiropractor because one of our people in the clinic understood chiropractic and told the parents. But how many children around the world are suffering, living lives of sickness or lack of 100% life expression because they're subluxated and nobody knows, right? And how many of those children grow up into adults who live compromised lives because they're living with nerve interference and they've never been checked for subluxation? And the answer is billions, right? So our mission in this clinic is to check as many people as we can and to get people to become aware of this life principle, as we refer to it, and to recognize that it's at work inside them right now. So we have what we call a family chiropractic clinic, and we love to take care of families. And that has meanings on different levels. A, we take care of families, but B, and most importantly, we take care of each person that comes here as if they're a family member to us, as if they're a mother, a father, a brother or a sister, or a child. And so when I'm thinking about how often I want to check somebody, I say, if this was my son or daughter, how often would I check them? If this was my brother or my sister, how often would I check them? And I'm never going to compromise on that, okay? So we need a commitment from people. If they want to be patients in this clinic, they got to commit to the fact that it's going to take time and that we're going to have to check them frequently at first, okay? And we make everything else work. We look after the timing of the appointments. We create payment plans that work for people. We look after all of that, okay? But it's critical you get. It's going to take time and repetition. It's going to take a commitment on your part, okay? And I'll only accept the case if I think I can help it and get the subluxation corrected. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Good. So the last thing I want to leave you with is, just as Michael found his way into the clinic through a patient referral, we rely on that. And so after the class tonight, you're going to have the opportunity to arrange for loved ones, family members, friends, I don't care who, co-workers, anyone you want, you can arrange for them to get checked. And instead of it costing them a regular $150, they'll get a complete chiropractic evaluation, x-rays if necessary, their doctor's report, for $30, and you can make that offer available to as many people as you want. The only catch is that they're going to have 2 weeks to contact the office to confirm the appointment. Does that sound fair?
Yep.
Good. Any questions for me?
No.
Good.
Not really.
That's all I got then.
Good.
Sorry that Siri interrupted, but we're going to go out that way and we're going to get you checked and adjusted after we go over your x-rays and whatnot.